being recorded, and we are very lucky to have Phil Coker back. He's already done a few talks to us on things like energy, and he is Associate Professor in Sustainable Energy Systems at Reading University. So you're still there, are you, Phil?
Yeah, I'm still here.
You're still at Reading?
Well, briefly, yes. For a little while longer, I've still got a part-time role at Reading. So,
right. Okay, and you're doing a talk on solar panels, so I'll hand over and let you get on with it.
Okay, so just check. Can everybody see this, the slides?
Yeah, thank you.
Be up. Okay, perfect. Now all I've got to do is make sure I can advance them when I need to. Well, hello everybody. Thanks for your time. Good to see a few faces on the screen. Students just turn their cameras off, so when I do video presentations to students, I'm just staring at a blank screen a lot of the time. So it's nice to see the people I'm actually talking to. So, I mean, first off, I sort of ducked the "Am I still at Reading?" or was confused by this "Am I still at Reading?" question. I'm now at two Reading universities. So I've spent the last part of my career at the University of Reading researching all things renewable energy, the way that energy varies both on the side of supply. So, when the wind blows, when the sun shines, but also trying to understand how demand varies over time and how those two things link together. But that was gradually getting more and more part-time. So my role at the university is just a research role now, potentially coming to an end next year, but we'll see about that. But I've also taken a teaching role at the University College of Estate Management. And I'm in the middle of developing a master's module on infrastructure, which is keeping me fascinated at the moment. Questions like, why is our rail network so expensive? That I've yet to dig into, but plenty of things that I need to find out before sharing with the students. So my background is all about energy. I was a gas engineer back in the day. Before that was my first career, and then second career at as an academic at a university. I've said, variability has been the theme through my research, and that's going to be a theme through this presentation a little bit. Most recently, I've been involved with looking at electric vehicles, trying to understand the two-way implications for the grid, really. What do electric vehicles mean for the grid, but also what do considerations of the grid mean for the economics and the practicality of electric vehicles? Most recently, looking at heavy goods vehicles, so getting to the bigger end of the scale. So when Sally contacted me and said, would I be happy to do a presentation again, and suggested the topic of solar, there was a bit of a question in my mind. I mean, I always do the, well, what have I been working on recently and how relevant's any of that? And I think, sorry, the heavy goods vehicle stuff is a bit mundane, but so not too much to draw from that yet. And also the home issues of solar. Well, I'm sorry, I'm living in a house without solar panels again at the minute. And I thought, well, am I a bit of a fraud presenting? And my core area is very much sort of national systems and energy systems, rather than too much what happens at a building scale. And then I thought, well, okay, so I've not been through the quote process recently with solar panels, but actually I'm intending to soon. We've moved into a new build house down here in Taunton. So we've got a clean slate, and it's a job for the new year to start getting quotes for this house and consider whether it's viable for us. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to go away and do a little bit of research, get myself up to date with this stuff, and present some of my findings to you. It's very much going to inform our thinking through the next year and how we'll react when we get some of those quotes in. But anyway, to get underway, I'm intending to talk for 30 to 40 minutes. Hope that's about right, Sally, Caroline. And love to kick off some decent Q&A at the end. So if there are questions along the way, I mean, certainly any points of clarification or any quick questions, I'm happy to pick those up as we go. I can't see the chat at the moment, but Caroline, I imagine, probably can see the chat. So, feel free to put your hands up, use the hands up in Zoom, or feed questions into the chat. But if you've got comments, or if you've got deeper questions, then let's pick those up at the end. And Sally did feed me a couple of questions and things you might be interested in ahead of this, and I've picked up one of them within the presentation, but I've very deliberately held one back for the Q&A at the end because it felt like a better place for it. So I'm going to slide up saying, should we? And this was my pitch for the presentation, solar, should we? And in my mind, very simple answer, yes. I mean, absolutely. I think we should be going solar energy as hard and as fast as we can. But there's always a but to these things, isn't there? And I mean, the starting one is I've been nice and vague with the brief in terms of, well, who's this we? So, if we're saying we should go solar, does that just mean the world? Or is that the UK? Or is it us as individuals down at a domestic scale? So as I talk, I'll try and pick through some of those different scales and actually, think about the different levels and where is solar best, or should we be doing it everywhere? But why should we? I want to start with this one. There's something here that frustrates and fascinates me. That this concept of sustainability, I keep hearing people talk as if it's a choice. And then when we talk about it in academia, we get endlessly lost in definitions of what sustainability means. Now, well, if you go to a dictionary, sustainability is a thing that we can carry on doing. And okay, maybe you need to put a timescale in there. So let's say the thing you can carry on doing indefinitely. Well, if we can't carry on doing this thing indefinitely, we're going to have to stop it. So it's like sustainability is not a choice. The choice is how we get there and how unpleasant we make things along the way in getting there. But I'd say it's endlessly frustrating that people seem to think that this is discretionary somehow. So if we accept that, if we accept the fact that we do need to start behaving in a sustainable way, well, we need a sustainable energy system. And if you start looking for sustainable energy sources, there is only one that stands out. There are lots of different ways we can get at energy. A good number of them make claims to be sustainable, and very happy to sort of pick up on any of those in the Q&A at the end. But the only thing that we've got at the moment that is proven to work, is economic, and actually has the capacity to deliver at global scale is solar. So, right, yes, we need it. We need lots of it, and we need to get there as quickly as we can. But yeah, rather convenient that solar is also the cheapest source of energy globally now. And the last few years, it's got cheaper to build solar even than gas-fired generation or fossil fuels. That we didn't really think that day would come, but it's happily passed us in the last few years. But the question then is, well, okay, so I'm arguing that solar is the right thing to do globally. But what about any given location around the planet? And what happens if we happen to live in a windy, wet, dark island somewhere far north in the Northern Hemisphere, like, say, the UK, where you don't naturally think that the solar resource is the best thing to use? And I mean, fortuitously, quite a lot of solar energy gets moved to the UK in the form of wind. And you might have noticed that we've been going heavily towards wind generation in the UK. So maybe that's all we need. Do we need solar here at all? Is it the right thing to do in the UK? And this kind of brings me to what's been my core research area. A lot of the earlier work that I did at the University of Reading was with the meteorologists, and we were trying to understand how the different resources behave. So, does the wind always blow? Or no, we know it doesn't. So how long might you go without wind for? Similar questions with solar. When is it going to give you the best energy input? How does that relate to when you want energy on the grid? But there were a few sort of myths that we started to challenge through that work. One of the long-held concerns about solar is, well, it's not very reliable in the UK, and particularly at the time when you need energy most, which happens to be about now. I mean, go a bit deeper into the winter than this, but early evening in the winter is when we need energy most in the UK. And funnily enough, there's not much solar energy around at this point in time. So there was this view that solar was not particularly useful. But the thing that we unpacked was, when you start building wind generation, when you commit to that in a national energy system, you leave a gap because it is only windy some of the time. And this is a slightly bizarre one to try and argue for, but if you look at the statistics of this, wind leaves a gap for solar. And it actually displaces things like nuclear, because if you build a nuclear power station, you want it to be operating all the time. Well, when it's windy, that's going to displace some of the opportunity to generate from something like nuclear. And it actually harms the economics, having those two things on the system together. I mean, beyond a level. I mean, there is room for both, but there's not room for massive amounts of both. Whereas solar and wind sit really comfortably together. It's quite often sunny when it's not windy. So the two combine really well. So if you've already embarked on building lots of wind generation, and that's the direction you're going in an energy system, then it actually leaves a lot of space to build solar alongside it. And we discovered that there was a magic ratio, and I averaged it out to 50-50 when I put these slides together. But the numbers we actually came up with were 52 to 48. So I think it was 52% wind to 48% solar. I did realize earlier today that was horribly like the Brexit vote. So maybe I was more comfortable going with 50-50 anyway. I should emphasize that that's in power capacity terms. So it makes a lot of sense to try and have as much installed power in terms of solar as we've got as wind. But over a year, you'll only get about a third as much energy from the solar as you will from wind. So somewhere like the UK, we'll still be predominantly wind generation, but it's very helpful to have a lot of solar along the way too. And the other thing that I tucked into this slide was this amazing surprise of how cheap solar's got even here. Because again, I mean, it had long been thought that because it's not very sunny in the UK, then it would be a very expensive and possibly a silly place to build solar energy. But the fact that there are big schemes pitching to the government and at a price of £47 a megawatt hour now, I mean, that's astounding compared to where we were 10 years ago. We'd never have believed that we'd be building solar in the UK for that kind of price. I need to explain that unit, because we'll talk later in pence per kilowatt hour. Because when we start talking domestic, I'll show you some pence per kilowatt hour prices. You just need to divide this by 10. So when you look at wholesale prices and big power stations, you tend to get units of pound per megawatt hour. So that's 4 pence, well, nearly 5 pence a unit compared to what we're used to. So you can build a big solar farm and generate electricity for a return of less than 5 pence a unit. So hold that figure in your heads, because we'll come back to that one later on. Where do we need to get to? This is National Grid's view of the world. They do a great piece of work every year. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at this set of documents, but they pull a thing together called the Future Energy Scenarios. They consult very widely on it. I'm very impressed by the amount of effort they go to and the consultation they do to pull these documents together. And they portray possible futures. And they always work with 4 scenarios and project what those 4 scenarios might look like. They change the names of them each year, and they came under criticism a few years back when they only had 1 scenario of the 4, I think, that was compliant with the Paris Agreement. Well, it was kind of about the time of the Paris Agreement. But now 3 of their 4 scenarios should achieve the carbon targets that we've set out to as a country. I rather enjoy the fact that their other scenario they now call falling short. It used to be business as usual, but their business as usual has become falling short. Anyway, ever so quickly, if you look at now, you see there's something like 15 or so gigawatts of solar energy on the grid in the UK. And the various projections here are multiplying that by 3 or maybe even 4 times over the next few decades. So possibly by 2050, we could be up to 90 gigawatts. Now, I mean, a thing that I enjoyed that they buried in this year's document, the little fact in the corner of the slide, the British Energy Security Strategy suggests that we should be up to 70 gigawatts of solar by 2035. So this is a very recent government policy document. This is a very recent government review of energy with an emphasis on energy security. And it's actually come up with an aggressive solar target, which is higher than any of even National Grid's projections. So make of that what you will, because I mean, it's surprising to me that the government was being that ambitious with solar, but also the scenarios that are on the screen at the moment are National Grid's credible projections of what could happen. And the green leading the way is National Grid's most ambitious credible projection of what could happen. And we've got a very recent government strategy document, which is actually going further and faster than National Grid's most credible projection. Yeah, like I say, make of that what you will. So we've got a massive increase coming yet in terms of solar generation in the UK. Where are we going to put it? Do we go big grid scale solar farms? Do we build this on farmland? It's a very attractive option for farmers. It's quite a good way to make money out of land at the moment. And I mean, I only know this anecdotally. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I understand that you can make a lot more money out of solar panels in a field than you can trying to grow crops or raise cattle at the moment. So you can see why farmers would be interested. There's quite a lot of controversy over this. I mean, particularly a number of Conservative politicians got very upset about this idea of covering over all our farmland with solar panels. And Liz Truss made a big play of this. I think Rishi Sunak was on record as well as saying, this is not a thing we should not be doing. I will not let this happen on my watch. But of course, as in all these things, it's a lot more nuanced than that. The language is around high productivity farmland. I haven't got that phrase quite right. But certainly it doesn't seem a very good idea to build solar panels on high grade farmland. But there is an awful lot of land out there that doesn't meet that criteria. And I want to jump ahead, actually. I'm going to show a slide in a few minutes' time from CPRE. If that acronym doesn't mean anything, they used to call themselves the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. And they commissioned a study recently that I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. But I was invited to join the peer review group for that study. And so I turned up on a meeting like this. I was the only energy academic in the room other than the couple of people from UCL who'd completed the study, who'd compiled the study for the CPRE. And it was dominated by the likes of RSPB, Greenpeace, a couple of people from BEIS, the Government Energy Department there, the Countryside Alliance were present. And the one point that I wanted to make was, I mean, it seemed quite obvious to me that CPRE would be against building solar panels on farmland. And I wanted to make the point of, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we've just about built momentum with this. We've actually finally got going with large amounts of renewable energy. Don't suddenly stop that when it's currently, offshore wind and large-scale solar are the only viable shows in town at the moment. So I wanted to make this point of, careful what you're saying. But I didn't need to, because it was being widely echoed by the likes of the experts from the RSPB and Greenpeace. The point that CPRE are making is absolutely build on rooftops where you can. But there is a recognition that we need to go hard and fast with renewable energy. And also there can be a lot of co-benefits. When you build solar panels on land, it doesn't suddenly mean you can't do anything else with it. So in sort of thinking about nature terms, it can still be a viable place for wildlife. It can still be a useful piece of land to store carbon dioxide or other services that we might want the natural environment to provide. From a farming perspective, you can still grow crops or graze animals in between solar panels. Obviously, not as many as if you didn't have the solar panels there in the first place. But it isn't a hard either or conundrum. I think the biggest problem is probably that we don't like looking at the things and we just prefer looking at green fields. That's probably the biggest single concern. And unfortunately, one of the complexities that I do need to mention here is often what's driving where the solar panels end up is grid connections. So it's both, is there capacity on the national system to connect generation in at that point, but also how far have you got to run cables to get there? So that where these things end up, the companies that are building them and putting the planning applications in are trying to juggle a lot of factors, and getting the energy to where you need it to be is a biggie. But I quite like Carbon Brief. So when I was trying to do some fact checking here, I was pleased when I found out this is one of their pieces of analysis. So this was some work that Carbon Brief did in responding to Liz Truss, actually, when it was in the news, 18 months back, whenever that was. And they were trying to get in context how much farmland are we going to put over if we do build solar panels. If we go all out, even on farmland with solar. And this is an infographic showing a breakdown of the entire UK land area. And you can see how much of UK land area is given over to pasture, arable and other agriculture, fair amount to forests and natural grassland. So you can see the decreasing blocks going down. And in the top right corner, the darker little yellow square is the current amount of solar generation, or the current amount of solar panels. And the slightly lighter rectangle, the slightly lighter yellow rectangle that's up there is the amount of land that would be given over if we did build twice as much again. So kind of in line with the government's targets. If we did it all on green land, then that's the amount of land area that would be given over. So it's not significant on the grand scheme of things, although it would be an awful lot of solar panels to look at. They make this point in another graphic, but I liked the little piece of analysis they did. Actually, the amount of land that we give over to golf courses at the moment is far bigger than that entire light yellow block. So there's far more land area given over to golf courses than we would give over to the entire solar panel area, even if we did do all of this on greenfield sites. So that puts things into context a bit. But this is an outcome of the CPRE report now, and they quite reasonably, quite rightly, are saying, well, there are better places to put solar panels than on fields. It may be more expensive to do it, but they commissioned the academics at UCL to actually run some numbers on this, and look at what land area is there available for rooftops, car parks, different types of building, how much energy could you generate from those things, and that's what fed into the report that I was, that half a day I was contributing to the review of, and they've now published since. So their current campaign is for rooftop solar, and you can see in this breakdown here of how much power they believe could be generated from solar in these different situations. I think a really compelling one for me is the car parks bit, which is the first bar at the top. You can build canopies over car parks. It's quite a cheap way of installing. Well, it's not as cheap as a greenfield site, but it's kind of the second cheapest way of installing solar now, is these car park canopy ideas. and there's quite a lot of potential to do that. And the things that I told you I think about my research of electric vehicles, there's some obvious attraction as we're putting more and more electric car chargers in. Then there's some attraction to having solar panels in those locations as well. Good place to do it. But then much bigger blocks, they've got allocated to non-domestic buildings. So 38 gigawatts if we were to max out what we're doing on non-domestic buildings. So that would be a massive amount of solar. At the bottom, an even bigger potential on existing houses. And then in the middle, in the green, is the potential on new builds. So we need to think a little bit about all of those things in a minute when we come to domestic houses. But there's the national grid graph I showed you was trying to get up to 90 gigawatts by 2050. So here's a picture suggesting there is more than enough capacity to do that on rooftops and car parks. So you certainly hope at some point we do move away from building too much solar on green fields, and we actually start to take more advantage of these what are effectively wasted land areas at the moment. So I'm all for the CPRE's campaign, but I don't think this means we instantly stop the schemes that are in the pipeline for farming land. I think we just need to gradually shift the dynamic here. But let's look at some of the questions with this. If we want to put solar on non-domestic buildings, that is potentially a great thing to do. I mean, it's ideal in terms of land use. There are big areas of roof there to work with. There's potentially a strong economic case. So the picture I'm showing you at the moment is buildings at the University of Reading, the campus up the hill in Reading. And this particular building and the solar panels that you can see there with the snow clearing off them, they were actually subsidy free. So that was a financial case that was raised purely for the energy payback that would come from those solar panels, or the saving from the university's energy bill that would come about from those panels. So, the university facilities management team were convinced that this was a thing worth doing with no independent subsidy. And that's pretty much what you'd expect to be the case now for any commercial site where the person or the company that owns the building is also responsible for the energy use on site and uses a moderate amount of energy during the day. So, I mean, a university obviously uses a lot of electricity during a day. We do all our teaching during the day. So, there's big activity in daytime. The university owns the buildings. The university paid for the panels. It's totally a thing worth doing. The problems here with the CPRE's vision is that is far from always the case as you go around the UK. Quite a lot of commercial property is independently owned and leased out. So quite often the energy bill payer on site is not the same person or company as owns the building and would have the interest in investing in solar panels in the first place. So it gets commercially a lot more complicated. And really, the trick here is very much you want to be the bill payer that is the same outfit as those that are investing in the panels, because that's when this really works and works well. But there is plenty of potential there yet to come. So come down to a domestic scale then, and this is our old house in Abingdon. So that picture is somewhere that's a lot nearer to you folk than it is to Linda and me now. Sadly, at my roof that I left behind. I was trying to remember when we actually installed those panels. If any of you are better at your history of feed-in tariffs than I am, we just about got in on time for the second tier of the feed-in tariff. So we weren't the big winners like I think some people in the group are. I think there are people here who might have got in at the first tier and made lots of money. but we still did quite nicely, thank you, from subsidies on that roof. So, you know, there was this time when you could install solar panels, sign up to this deal, and effectively the government would pay you a sizable amount of money for every unit of energy that your panels generated. That is no longer the case. You know, we've moved on from that. There are no meaningful subsidies available. The feed-in tariff is no more. However, in the meantime, panels have got a lot cheaper and electricity's got a lot more expensive. So the economics for us as homeowners, it's exactly the same challenge as I was just describing for commercial buildings. You want to be in the situation where you're using it as much of the electricity on site as possible for it to be worth you actually investing in panels in the first place. And I pulled some numbers together. So I said at the start, you know, I confessed at the start, I haven't had a recent quote myself. I haven't started on the process of quotes yet. So if anybody on the call has had recent quotes for panels, then chip in at the Q&A at the end, because I'll be interested to compare these numbers with any recent quotes or any recent systems that have been installed. But the first place I went was the Energy Saving Trust. Again, another organisation I've got a lot of time for, and they put quite a lot of work into keeping their stuff up to date. And as far as I could see, it is still up to date. They've reflected things like the recent changes in energy cap and stuff in everything that's on their website. So if you work with the Energy Saving Trust's recommendations, then they suggest a typical 3.5 kilowatt peak solar system should generate about 3,000 kilowatt hours a year. So that gives us the numbers that we need to start with. And that's great. I mean, if you're going to get to use all of that, then think 30 pence a kilowatt hour, something like the current energy price, most of us, or electricity price that most of us will be paying. So that's £900 a year. Well, £900 a year payback on a £7,000 scheme, which is, again, what the EST are suggesting at the moment. I make that nearly a 13% simple payback, or simple rate of return, or an 8-year payback. Okay, so your asset will be depreciating. It's not quite the same as putting the money in a building society, but still 13% return is pretty good in anybody's book at the moment. Of course, there's a but here. That assumes that you get to use all the electricity yourself, which I'm afraid is highly unlikely. It's if you're in a domestic home generating 3,000 kilowatt hours a year when the sun shines, it's very unlikely that you're going to use all of that yourself. Now, if you want to dig into this the simple way, if anybody out there is thinking about installing in solar, then get on to the Energy Saving Trust site. And I'll put the link on this slide, and there's a link to a guide at the end. And they actually give lots of examples. They give examples for different areas in the country, how much of the time you're at home, and how much they suggest that you should be able to earn or actually use from the generation yourself. Now, of course, they're making big approximations and assumptions in doing that. So it's better if you can work it out yourself, better if you've got an idea yourself of what your home electricity use pattern is. So you've got to really start thinking about how much do you use electricity for, and when does that happen? So for Linda and I, in our nice new build house down in Taunton, well, our entire electricity use over a year was only 1,800 kilowatt hours. So generating 3,000 kilowatt hours a year is not going to be a great help to us if we're only using 1,800. We're going to end up wasting quite a lot of that 3,000 at the moment. Now, I mean, how many of you know your annual electricity usage, but you'll be able to find that out from bills? You should be able to look back fairly easily and find out what you're using in a year. But you then want to start thinking about, well, how much of the time are you at home? Of the things that are using electricity, are they running during the day or not? So I mean, I deliberately used, well, I searched for a picture of a kitchen because lots of our appliances are in kitchens, but I liked the hand washing example. So, you know, our house down here at the moment, and we can rant about new builds at the end as well if we like. At the moment, we've still got gas-fired central heating and gas-fired hot water. So if we were to switch the hot water over to a heat pump-based system, then that would give us a much bigger electricity demand that's happening throughout the day. The heat bit's not so interesting because the heat bit is only going to be in winter when you're not generating as much from solar anyway. So, I mean, we use massive amounts of energy for heating, but that's a bit more problematic with solar. But hot water we use throughout the year. We tend to store it in tanks anyway, especially if you've got, you know, electricity fed system. So that's more interesting. And the other thing for us at the moment is the builders gave us an electric oven and a gas-fired hob. So, you know, the gas-fired hob again at some point we'll convert that to an electric one, and that again will start to nudge our electricity use up. Another one that's fascinating me is how many of you have actually got energy displays in this fabled new world of smart meters, where the government's mandated smart meters and the energy companies are rolling them out? I haven't seen one for real yet. So I saw one hand up of the people that I'm seeing on the screen at the moment. Oh, so there's a few. Actually, people are getting these things in houses. Yeah, so we've got smart meters in the new house, but we haven't actually got our hands on an energy display yet. But at least now we switch to Octopus, we're getting decent information sort of retrospectively that we can download. So we are starting to get access to data on the patterns of our electricity use. But yeah, if you've got, if you're on a smart meter, better still if you've got an energy display at home, if you've got some way of actually recording and analyzing that data, then that can really help you think about these questions of, you know, are you going to be able to make maximum use of the solar that you generate if you go down that line?
Phil, could you clarify what you mean by an energy display? Is it more than just the little square thing that they give you to see how much you're using?
Well, I absolutely mean the little square thing that they give you to see how much you're using. Because, you know, you've got a meter hidden away in a cupboard somewhere or in a box outside, but what allows you to see that reading in real time? So that's all I mean by an energy display. But there are plenty of different types of display out there. There are plenty of different versions of that service, and some of them will give you access to the data in a way that you can analyze it. So, you know, ideally, you want to be able to get, I mean, if you like spreadsheets, you want to be able to get it into a spreadsheet and play around with it. Some of them just give you an instantaneous display. That's it. You can see it in the moment, but you haven't got any meaningful way of working with that data afterwards. So, you know, what you really want is ownership of your own data and some way to actually look at this stuff yourself. But some more of the numbers that you need to understand this world. And there's another thing on here that, you know, has changed my thinking very recently. So I've started at the top, you know, 30p per kilowatt hour. That's a reasonable indicative rate for what most of us are paying for electricity at the moment. The things that we said we would do after we bought our new house, in the sequence was sort our car out first, then think about solar panels, and then someday we're going to have to think about a heat pump. And I ideally wish that the builders had made the house a bit more heat pump ready, but at least the fact that we're in a well-insulated house should help us with that one. But we got as far as the car, right? So we've got our shiny new electric car sitting on the drive, and that meant exploring tariffs. And before we did this, I was thinking, well, when we get to that next step of solar panels, well, it's obvious, isn't it? Because you're going to want to use your solar panels to charge your electric vehicle, you know, because I knew that the last thing you want to do is give the electricity away to somebody else. You want to use as much of it yourself as possible. And I thought that would be sort of the significant part of the future. Then we explored EV tariffs. And we're now signed up with Octopus on their Go tariff. And for 4 hours overnight, we get electricity at 9.5 pence a kilowatt hour. So we can charge our car at 9.5 pence. There is not a lot of point us spending all this money on solar panels and feeding that electricity into the car when the rest of the day electricity is worth 30 pence a kilowatt hour. If we can buy electricity off Octopus at 9.5 pence overnight. So knowing that immediately undermined one of what I thought the logics of home solar would be. A little bit more obscure, but tucked away on here, the government has done something to help with these issues of solar finance. There is actually a requirement on energy suppliers to pay an export amount. And there's a minimum amount that energy suppliers must pay for any electricity that you export back to the grid. But at the moment, that amount is about 5.5 pence a kilowatt hour. So again, it's just reinforcing this point that I've been making all the way along, that you really want to be using the electricity yourself to displace your normal electricity use if you possibly can. Because if you put it into a car, it's a third of the value. If you feed it back into the grid, then it's close to a sixth of the value. So, this is all about home, trying to utilize the electricity yourself. The other number that I put on here, because it's a data set that we've been playing with, it is possible to get at the half-hourly an indicator of the wholesale price and how that varies through the year. And I just did a very quick averaging on last year's wholesale price and found out that it was 19.8 pence a kilowatt hour. So that's the price that power stations are paid for electricity. You would expect that to be a lot lower than what we pay at home, because there's a lot of other costs to come on top of that. And actually there were some points last year where it was negative. So that average price, if we only took the positive half hours of the year, that average price would be even higher. So it's just interesting to me that the price that electricity is traded at was close to 20 pence per kilowatt hour last year, but we can buy electricity overnight at 9.5p, and if you sell solar electricity onto the grid, you only get paid 5.5p for it. Yes, Kim, turn your mic on and far away.
It's David. Kim's my partner.
Sorry,
it's fine. Yeah, I was just going to come in. I'm seriously not a representative of Octopus, but you've mentioned Octopus, Phil. So, and I won't disturb your presentation. I'll come back in at Q&As perhaps, but just want to say that we put panels in 18 months ago, and just by chance, we kind of done that just to reduce our carbon footprint more than anything else. But within a few months, Octopus, we then transferred to Octopus because their export tariff was much better than we had with Bulb. But then very shortly after that, I think September last year, they changed their export tariff to 15 pence a unit, which has made a massive difference to our kind of calculations in terms of the payback, if you like, for installing the panels. Now, I don't know whether I think that's tied in, or Octopus have said that would be set for another year at least, and they may change that, I guess. But that does make quite a difference to the electricity we're not able to use ourselves, across the year.
Sorry, ignorance. Is that better or worse than what it had been before? Was that an increase?
So that was an increase. Yeah, they doubled it. It was they were at 7.5 pence. Bulb were about 4p, I think. But yeah, currently, and that's been the case for over a year with Octopus. It's 15 pence per kilowatt.
Yeah.
Kilowatt hour.
Phil, can I just jump in? We've got a couple of things on the chat. So Rob Rutherford has said, how does having a battery affect the economics? And Tom has also said, are the batteries you know, very harmful to the environment? Is it worth it from an environmental point of view?
Well, I'll jump a slide on in that case. So, I mean, again, here, let's do the economics first. I mean, I'm working with the Energy Saving Trust figures, and their guidance says £5,000 to £8,000 for a domestic solar battery. I was a little bit surprised by how high that is. I was expecting a lower figure now. And again, let's save this one for the Q&A at the end. But if anybody's got recent experience, I'd welcome, you know, any real figures. But if it is that much, you're close to doubling the cost of the scheme. So it certainly is going to help you make more use of what you're generating. It's really going to help with everything I've been pushing, that, you know, this is a game about using as much of the generation yourself as possible. And a battery is totally going to help with that. But if you're up at these price levels where you're potentially doubling the cost of the scheme, it seems improbable that you're going to get a good economic payback. I think if you go to the lower end of the battery cost, and particularly if you can get a little bit under that 5,000 figure, it could well become worth doing. And it's certainly something we'll be looking at, and I'll be running the numbers on hard. With all of these things, until you get a quote, you don't know exactly what it's going to cost for you. The thing that fascinated me from the Energy Saving Trust guidance was they had a little throwaway anecdote in there of somebody saying how good their Tesla Powerwall was because they'd had a couple of power cuts, and it had actually allowed them to stay on electricity even without power cut, even through power cut periods. Now, that surprised me because of what I was aware of with the electricity standards in this country. I mean, any of you that got solar panels know that they turn off if there's a power failure. You know, that there is a very high standard of protection to make sure that electricity is not pushed back onto the grid when there's a power failure, for the safety of the engineers working on the network. So I didn't know this was a thing that could be done within the standards of the UK. I've only stumbled across it very recently. I haven't done full fact checking on this yet. But as long as the kit isolates the connection properly, then there's no reason why this can't be a thing. And I think that potentially adds value to a system that we'd actually all be prepared to pay for. I don't know how much you would choose to pay for it, but certainly some amount of money. And I think with a lot of the uncertainties that are coming in the world going forwards, with climate impacts, with international energy supply challenges, having a little bit of grid independence and backup at home might be quite attractive to a good number of us. So I think adding a battery could be about more than just the pure economics. The question was raised about the environmental impact. I've got a slightly easier answer on panels than I have on batteries. Yeah, there are absolutely environmental and materials challenges inherent in a lot of the things we were doing right now. It's true for probably wind turbines more than solar panels, actually. It's absolutely true for batteries. It's true for chemicals that are in catalytic converters in petrol engine cars. It's true for chemicals that are in the electronics in our laptops. You know, they're not pleasant processes that go into mining these things. As a collective human society, we have not got a grip on the human side of the supply chains that are accessing some of these materials yet. I personally don't think there are reason to stop doing it. I think in the right place, we need to be deploying batteries to get to a low carbon energy system. I think we need these technologies. I think we need to be moving forward with them. but what we should be demanding from the companies that are providing them and demanding from our politicians is much more robust supply chain standards around how these materials are being mined and the conditions that these materials are being mined in. And the current world where so much of what we buy is just built in China and we have very little control over the way it's manufactured or where the materials come from, it is certainly a cause for concern. I don't think it's a cause to stop doing things, but I think we should be screaming from the rooftops that we deserve better than that. Was that both the questions, Caroline? Was the other?
Yeah, and that's both of them. But also Neil Killeran has said regarding the batteries, it depends on how much of your energy you can use each day. Also, they allow energy storage from the grid off peak.
Yep.
Prices per battery unit can be lower depending on the brand.
Okay. I mean, if you jump back just to this, you know, if you're on a go tariff and you can buy electricity at 9.5p overnight and you've got a battery, then obviously that's a winner for you if you're displacing electricity during the day at 30 pence a kilowatt hour. So you can see how the economics get useful, but also quite complicated. And I know that we'll have people on this call who just love running the numbers on this stuff, but we'll have other people on the call also who just want to be told the answer and be able to trust it. And this world is a little bit more complicated than one where you just get a single trustworthy answer just at the moment.
Yeah, Alison's asked whether there's a free tool you could recommend to estimate what your roof could generate based on its orientation.
I actually don't know. So the thing I'm pointing to at the moment is the Energy Saving Trust website, and they've got examples, sort of case study examples, rather than a modeling tool. The people that I know that have published the best stuff out there is the University of Sheffield. I don't know if they've got a rooftop calculator. Yeah, I would have to do an internet search, and I'm sure that that's quite a simple thing to do. There's not one that I know of at the moment. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming in the future, a little bit about materials, and then we'll get on to the more widespread Q&A. I'm aware the clock's ticking. What's coming? So there's all these acronyms being bandied around in... I've said a lot of my research has ended up thinking about electric vehicles, and we love a bit of jargon. V2G I'm quite comfortable with. You know, vehicle to grid was the original concept of this is about not just putting electricity from the grid into your vehicle battery, but can you go the other way? Can you take electricity back out of a vehicle battery and put it into the grid? Lots of reasons why that's very attractive. Lots of reasons why it might not be an economically sensible thing to do. V2X is just being a bit of jargon that's being used as a vehicle to everything. V2H, vehicle to home, is getting potentially more interesting right now. A lot of the early work that's been done in this space has happened in Japan. Because they have power cut issues related to earthquakes, they're a lot more interested in home resilience. So a lot of work was done with the Japanese car companies into providing the vehicle to grid capability from their cars. And it hasn't translated to the UK yet because of these domestic standards that I was talking about, the protection standards from the codes in our grid. But it's quite a common thing, or it become quite a common thing in Japan, that you can power your home off your car battery. It's potentially coming in the UK, and some of the car manufacturers are thinking about really positioning themselves into the home energy service space. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Right now, you can the other bit of jargon that has appeared is vehicle to load, and that's a bit of car jargon. and some of the newest electric cars have actually got 3-pin sockets in them. And this gets really dodgy at this point, because you could then run a cable from a 3-pin socket with another 3-pin socket on it and plug it into your house. It's a really, really bad idea, and do not do it, because there's no earth protection to the car. So there are all kinds of hazards associated with that. But if you know what you're doing, and if you are a competent electrical engineer and know how to work around that, then there are people out there who can hack this and are now, configuring electric cars to run energy back into the home. And this effectively gives, if you're prepared to pay for a car in the first place, which is not cheap, right? But if you are, then you've effectively got a battery for free to provide your home services. This is coming. I don't think any of us that watch this territory know exactly what form it's going to come in, but it's certainly not very far away of coming in some shape or form. The other thing that a lot of my academic colleagues get excited about is this idea of local energy trading. Quite a lot of the energy researchers worry about equity, are concerned about trying to actually make sure that energy is affordable for people and communities can get the very best from a lot of these innovations, rather than it just being the domain of the comfortably well off all the time. Well, the idea here is, if somebody in your area has got solar panels and they're not using all that electricity, then it would be a really good idea to actually match that to your usage, rather than that electricity having to push further back through the grid and be dispersed and cause the kind of problems that reverse power flows cause on the grid. And there are trial schemes out there that do this. There are trial schemes out there that couple one homeowner's energy bills to the surplus generation of somebody else within the scheme. And the kind of people that research things like blockchain and distributed ledger technology, this is an IT geek domain, this one, but they love this kind of scheme, because it all comes down to, how do you track the generation? How do you make sure that the person that's using the electricity actually matches to the generation? I don't know. I don't know how real this is going to become at scale, but it makes a lot of logical sense if we can develop real business models that allow communities to share solar energy in this way, and allow us to get a bit more benefit of our neighbours investing in these things and get some two-way benefit from that. And the other big trend that's coming is we're just electrifying a lot more stuff. I keep talking about electric vehicles. I've mentioned heat pumps as I've been talking. It looks like the future has us moving away from gas, when we can, has us moving away from petrol and diesel in our cars to electricity, at which point we all start using a lot more electricity at home, at which point you're likely to use a lot more of your own generation at home anyway. And I mean, that becomes a little bit of a question of, when do you leap? Do you hold off and wait for these things, or do you invest in a scheme now, but knowing that the economics are likely to get better as we go through the next few years? One of the questions that Sally fed me with was about recyclability of panels. I mean, can they be recycled? Absolutely, yes. And I mean, if you go back to most of what you see is a first generation solar panel. If it's got an obvious aluminium frame around it, then it's crystalline silicon, first generation solar panel. They're basically glass, silicon, and a little bit of aluminium. So they're very recoverable materials, and there aren't too many nasties in there. I mean, a little bit of silver, a little bit of copper. You might have a little bit of lead in the glass, though there are a few things that need to be taken care of. But actually, there aren't that many nasties in a first generation solar panel. I made the mistake of doing the academic literature search on this first, which is not always where you get the best answers. Right now, it's a bit of a marginal payback. It takes you more energy to recycle a solar panel than it does to access the raw materials. But this is not just an energy game. You don't want to be mining raw materials if you don't have to. We do need to get to a circular economy. In the UK, it is a requirement that there must be capacity to recycle solar panels. And in fact, now here's a fun one that I didn't know. When Joju installed our scheme, I wasn't aware of this, but apparently it is incumbent on all installers to take away and recycle your panels for free. I'm not sure I'd want to put that to the test, or it would be interesting to put that one to the test, shall we say. And also, given that panels are supposed to have a 25-year life, how many of the installers are still going to be in business in their current form in 25 years? So will you get to challenge them on this? But yeah, part of the European waste electrical equipment regs, which have been implemented in the UK, PV panels get caught under that legislation, and there is a requirement on suppliers and thereby installers to recycle these things. As panels start to reach end of life, there is going to be a massive volume of material that will trigger a major upscaling of industrial capability to recycle these things. I was quite kind of pleased to discover when prodding into this that we do actually have at least one dedicated plant for this in Europe. It's in France, that was built in 2018, so I don't know whether any more have opened up since. But this does happen in Europe. So there is dedicated infrastructure for recycling panels in Europe. And back to the point I opened with about sustainability, it's not an option. We need to get there. So we do need to get better at recycling everything. I think to some extent that means we need to get better at designing things for recyclability. But actually, solar panels, I think I'm fairly relaxed on that one. Yeah, there's a good chance, a very good chance they will be recycled, especially in the UK. So let's wrap up and try and get to some more questions. Yes, I totally think solar PV is a good thing. We should be starting to put that on roofs and car parks whenever we can. Wouldn't it be great if we were doing it from new? I mean, our house was built by Barratt. It continues to be a frustration to me that it was not even, we had options on what tiles would we like, what floors would we like, what kitchen would we like, but solar panels and heat pumps were not even an option. There was the hope that this stuff would have been mandated from 2016. And here we are, well, it was 2022, and it's still not even an option. And still homes are not even being designed in a way that heat pumps are going to be easy to retrofit. But totally, we should be putting solar panels on houses from new. It's a shocking thing that this is not happening. The economics absolutely work best where the owner of the panels is also the electricity bill payer. And both for a business or for a homeowner, you've got to think about your electricity use pattern, and actually, are you going to get good use of the electricity you generate? But I like this little proverb. That photograph was taken on a sculpture trail up in the Lake District somewhere. But the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is now. We need to get on with this stuff. And the best time to put solar panels on your roof was, well, when we put them on our old house and we were making money from the feed-in tariff. But we need to get on with this stuff. That's my prepared materials. Thank you for your attention. Any more Q&A, or I'll hand it back to Caroline to do the chairing at this point. Q&A or comments? Yeah, questions or comments?
Well, there's a question in the chat from Michelle. He says, is there enough materials on Earth to equip the world with PV and batteries?
So PV, not a problem, because silicon is the most abundant element in the Earth's crust. So no great problem with PV. Batteries is more interesting because, I mean, the biggie's lithium, but there are other things that we're, things like cobalt that we're using in batteries, and people that are looking at the scaling up challenge, particularly what's coming with electric vehicles. There are plenty of tensions coming in supply chains. Not absolute material limitations, though there tend to be enough of these minerals out there in extractable resources to meet the needs that we're projecting for them. But the damage that's done dragging these things out of the ground in the first place, the industrial scaling up that's needed to get at those minerals is much more challenging. I think on the good news side is we're a long way away from the end of the story in battery technology development. And there's an incredible amount already happening with this. I mean, it's already appearing in cars now. There are different types of lithium batteries, some which use much lower amounts of materials. They tend to be cheaper as a result. They tend not to hold as much energy as a result. So car manufacturers are even mixing and matching some of these cheaper, lower chemical cells alongside some of the more expensive, higher energy density ones. And certainly, I think as we look at cars as an example, we're going to see more cars with somewhat smaller batteries and ranges in them as we start to work out what the sweet spot is. And we're seeing already battery technologies go into those kind of vehicles that are not using anything like the same level of harmful materials. And lithium batteries are not the end of the story either. There's all kinds of work going on out there for alternative chemistries and technologies for storing electricity into batteries. So I am worried about the environmental impact of getting at the materials, but I don't think it's a showstopper. And we're we're on a journey here with this one.
All right, thank you. Now, if you want to ask a question, you'll have to raise your hand on the screen, because I've got three screens to scroll through on my computer, and so it's quite hard to keep track. But if you just raise your hand on the reactions button, then I can see who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, or make a comment. I mean, those examples of people who've invested recently, and maybe whoever the person with the battery would be interesting to hear from as well. But there's a hand up first, Caroline.
Yeah, we've got Graham.
Yeah,
Graham.
Graham. Sorry, it's a couple of things. I mean, I do have a battery, and in the winter, it does allow me to consume everything that I generate. But the thing I thought I'd just share is I'm signed up to a scheme with Axel Energy, and tomorrow at 5 till 6 p.m. they're predicting that there will be a large grid load, and so they're going to pay me. They've auto-configured my battery to charge tonight, fully remotely. They've configured my battery to charge tonight, and they're going to pay me £2.10 a kilowatt hour to discharge my battery to the grid from 5 till 6 p.m. tomorrow. Now, I'm not sure that changes the overall economics of the thing, but I just thought that was an interesting thing to share, that they'll effectively be using my private battery for grid support to offset peak demand, and they're paying me pretty serious money for that.
Yeah, this is fabulously bonkers territory at the moment. I absolutely make the most of that while you can. it's a trial scheme that National Grid introduced last year. Lots of good reasons for doing it. There are very good reasons why they effectively want to be able to incentivize people turning down demand at particular times of day and year. I'm very cynical about them paying large amounts of money for people to do this because of the unintended consequences that has. I mean, there are all kinds of cheating behaviors that you can imagine, of people artificially increasing their electricity use at certain times of day, so it looks like they're doing less at other times. But this is a trial scheme. It's great that National Grid are being innovative and introducing these things. We're some way off from knowing what these commercials are going to settle down at over the next few years. But yeah, I mean, great. Thanks for the contribution, and make the most of it while you can.
Okay, thank you. The next one is John. John, do you want to unmute yourself? No, you're still muted. Sally, can you unmute him? John, you're still muted.
Sorry, I'm not allowed to unmute other people.
Oh, John, you need to click on the icon on the top right of your screen. Is there a little blue box? I'm not sure. While you're sorting that out, we'll take a question from David. Can you unmute yourself, David? Yeah.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much, Phil. That was all really interesting and helpful. I was just going to kind of add a little bit on what I said earlier about export and so on, but going on from that, really, we I think a big impact for us really was I know it's on the national TV ads with Albert Einstein telling us to get a smart meter because it will help reduce our usage, etc. But I mean, we have really found at home, since we had panels, and we obviously got a smart meter with that, had to get a smart meter for panels to come in. But also with our installation, we also had Solar Edge, the software with the panels, which just gives you, for people who don't know, just gives you a really good live data about how much energy your panels are producing and how much of that is you're using yourself and how much is being exported. So we've been really we've really got into making the most of the energy we're producing. So for example, Kim will do some baking middle of the day when the sun is shining, putting the kettle on, just waiting a moment if we can, so the sun is shining. We're lucky in that we have, if people are thinking about getting panels, it's worth consulting about this. Our roof is east-west facing, and when we consulted with our installer about this, he said, "Oh, that's good, because it means you get a longer range of sun through the day, particularly in the summer." So we've ended up, we still get quite a lot of power very, very late in the summer in the evenings and very early in the mornings, and it goes right through the day. So again, that's helped us to really make the most use of the available power that we had. So we haven't had a battery, but equally we've just cut down the amount of energy we use anyway, because we're very sort of mindful of what the smart meter reading is, but also how much energy we're producing from our solar panels.
Great. So John, you've unmuted yourself.
Thank you for the help with unmuting. Yes, the question I wanted to raise was, Mike Berners-Lee cites the carbon footprint of putting solar panels on a typical domestic roof as 5 tons, which is quite a lot. How important is that in the scheme of things?
The academic answer is non-trivial, I suppose. It's still worth doing because you'll more than recover the electricity that makes that worth it over time. The way that you calculate these things is changing, because well, it's still true now. I mean, you can work out the carbon emissions for every unit of electricity you take off the grid, and it'll tend to bounce around between 100 and sort of 200 grams a kilowatt hour. It gets a bit less than that sometimes now, but for any electricity that you generate at home, you can effectively you can consider it as, well, you're saving that amount of carbon. So if you've invested 5 tons in your solar panels in the first place, you would expect to save more than that, or far more than that over the lifetime of the panels. I mean, the other way this gets looked at is energy payback. And I've seen a worst case of 5 years. You know, you can take 5 years of generation to pay back the carbon or the energy that's used to build the things in the first place. Well, with an average life of 25 to 30 years of the panels, it's still worth doing. But we've got to be thinking about reducing that embodied carbon too. And, you know, fortunately, that's happening through on the technology side. You want to absolutely try and make your panels as efficient as possible with the minimum amount of material possible. Think about the energy that's being used to make the panels in the first place. And I mean, again, this is one of those other tragic ways that this has played out, that so much of the manufacturing is done in China, and so much of China's economic development has been back on the back of coal-fired generation. So we've got the slightly lunatic situation that we're installing solar panels over in the Western world to save our carbon emissions, but we're locking in coal-fired generation in China to make the things in the first place. It's still more than worth doing, but it is very unfortunate that that's the manufacturing route at the moment, and we need to get better at that. So we need to get better at design of panels in the first place. And I mean, China is decarbonizing their electricity grid quite rapidly too. So, you know, that side of it is getting better too. But,
Thank you.
Sally.
Yeah, I've got 2 completely unrelated questions, Phil. One is that you said right at the beginning that solar was the only proven sustainable energy solution. Were you by that meaning that wind is not proven sustainable, or were you counting wind as part of solar energy?
and I added onto it global scale, right? So wind is concentrated in particular areas around the globe. So it happens that the UK is a windy place, so wind's a great thing to do here, but that's not true across the planet.
Okay, so you weren't saying that it's not sustainable here in the UK?
Correct, I was not saying that.
The other question, I've been reading Dale Vince's memoir. I don't know if you've come across it. It's called Manifesto. He wrote it quite recently. He's the chap that started Ecotricity. And he says that the wholesale price of electricity is still linked to the price of gas. Is that true? Because it seems madness.
It's absolutely true, and it is madness. I don't know how much it's hardwired into the way that all markets for goods work, but the way that electricity markets work is that the price in any given time period is set by the most expensive thing on the system at that time. So we've always got gas-fired generation operating in the UK. You know, there's always some gas on the system, even at those magic half hours where far more than half the electricity is coming from wind and solar now. There'll always be some gas out there. So that gas-fired generation is setting the price.
And isn't there any way that that can be changed? I mean, would it just mean the government changing the rules, or is it not that easy?
Well, it is just that, but that's never that easy. You know, there are university departments full of energy economists arguing different ways of doing this and going about this stuff, and you kind of would have expected the government to be moving a bit faster on actually trying to reconfigure the market in this country, given what this is meaning on all of our bills. The other bizarre side of this one that I've not dug hard into, but doesn't seem to be mentioned a lot. I showed that strike price for solar energy back at the start, and it was something like 5p a kilowatt hour. You know, I gave it in the megawatt hour price, but you know, it's equivalent to 5p. Now, the way that mechanism is intended to work, it's a government guarantee to the generator. But when the market price goes above that level, the generator is supposed to pay money back to the government. So given that we've got an average wholesale price of 20p a kilowatt hour through last year, and we've got these generators on the system who are running at strike prices of 10 or 5p, we've got generators out there who are passing large chunks of money back to the government now because they're operating on this scheme. And I've not gone digging. I've not seen anybody really draw a lot of attention to this. I don't know how big an amount of money, or how big a share of the money that's changing hands it is. But yeah, there are some very bonkers things happening with the electricity price at the moment.
Okay. Phil, because we're near 9 o'clock, can I just ask one thing? You said that you've got an energy generation meter and I've just got a smart meter, so I can't see how much energy my panels are generating that I'm using. What make of energy generation meter are you using?
Oh,
So
hang on, I don't know what I said, because I'm in the old house that we had that had solar panels. Then that system was configured with a separate export meter. So your electricity meter would record what was coming in off the grid. Sorry, it didn't have an export meter. It had a generation meter attached to the solar panels. These days, these new smart meters are supposed to have a lot more of this capability actually built into the meter. I'm looking at David because I can see David up in the corner of my screen, and there was a gentle nod there. So I don't have a solar system on the house I'm in at the moment, so I can't answer that question. I don't know if anybody else can.
I think certainly on the smart meter we have, which is not, I mean, I think it's a fairly standard smart meter. You can kind of scroll through, and it shows you, the stuff about how much your electricity is costing you so far today. But if you scroll through, certainly on ours, you get to a point where it shows whether if you're exporting power with your panels, how much that is, how many kilowatt hours that is.
Yeah, but how much of the power that my solars are using am I using? So there's no cost involved there.
No, that's right. Your well, as far as I know, certainly our smart meter doesn't show you that. It only shows.
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, Caroline, certainly with our, I think this is what Phil's saying as well, with our, when our panels were installed, part of the installation, cost, whatever, product was to have a bit of software called Solar Edge, which gives you, through your smartphone or through a laptop, it's connected up to your Wi-Fi at home, and it gives you all the data about how much your panels are generating, but also tells you how much electricity you're importing live. how much you're exporting, how much you're self-consuming, so all the data, and that's then put together as, you know, on a daily basis, but also you can look back on your week's monthly usage, and yearly as well, and graphs and all sorts of stuff. So
you've had your system for a while now, haven't you, Caroline? Is yours?
Yeah, for about 4 or 5 years, but I think we did have that software available, but it never worked. I tried to connect and it never worked, so I thought maybe there's a magic meter I can buy that will tell me.
If I can throw in a point on that, I believe all SMETS 2 smart meters, which is the ones they've been installing for some time, will tell you the net amount that was exported. And I believe that the regulations for installing solar panels have always required a separate generation meter. So certainly my system, there is a meter that sat there doing nothing, but it has a reading that actually measures the amount of solar power generated on a meter somewhere near the inverter. And I thought it was a requirement, it certainly is now, that all systems have that separate meter. So you should be able to go find a meter somewhere near your inverter, read that should be telling you the total, and then your smart meter should be telling you the net that's exported, and the difference between the two is how much you're using.
Oh, I see. Well, I'd have to climb into the roof because the inverter's in the roof to track it down. Oh wait, thanks
I thought
very
you were
much.
going to say something like that.
It's definitely in the roof. Right, well, it's gone 9 o'clock, so shall we say thanks, Phil, for another brilliant talk. Thank you ever so much for entertaining us for an hour and a half. It's much appreciated. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks very much. We hope to lure you back another time.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. It's lovely to see everybody.
All right then, well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming.